Located off of Junction 6 of the M18 in the borough of Doncaster, with the population of over 18,000, is the town of Thorne, spelled with an E at the end, mind you. Home to many families, cafes and independent businesses, this South Yorkshire town is a place where you can grab a bite to eat, go for a walk or explore some of the wildlife and history. Talking about history, there's a lot of history here waiting for you to discover, some of it hidden, some of it in plain sight. Speaking of which, some of the stuff you can see that's historical is actually, surprisingly, the name. For example, did you know that Thorne is thought to mean the places where the thorns grow? Flint weapons and tools suggest settlement in the area from the Neolithic period, from between 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. There is some evidence of Roman settlement in the vicinity, but it was the Anglo-Saxons that properly settled here before 600 AD. There is believed to have been a church building here since the Saxon times, probably a chapel of ease. It dated back to the 12th century, but there was a rebuilding of the original church in 1326 following a disaster. The chancel dates back to the 6th century, making it the oldest part of the church, but there is also Norman stone in the entrance. There is a 15th century south porch, a 17th century royal coat of arms, and a 20th century rood screen. It also has 15 stained glass windows depicting Jesus and the stories of his life. Nearby there is the old vicarage built in the 1700s and was originally a rectory with alterations in the 1900s. Just across the road from the church is another example of medieval Thorne. Although there is not much there now, Peel Hill is the motte, the only surviving part of what was a motte and bailey. A motte, coming from French for mound, was a pile of earth and or rubble, making an artificial hill for which the bailey was to be placed upon. The bailey, coming from French for enclosure, was a courtyard with a defensive wall, usually a palisade, all built around it to keep out invaders. Palisade comes from the Latin word meaning stake, and was a wall made of, stakes put closely together. Peel is a term that is used to mean a palisade, and this would have once been a site of a motte and bailey. In the Domesday Book, Thorne was spelled a little differently, and was recorded with having 16 households, and the land belonged to William of Warren. Peel Hill Castle was built in the 11th century. The Normans built castles and churches all across England in order to exert their control and influence over their newly conquered country. Magnesium limestone, which was used to make Peel Hill Castle and indeed St Nicholas's Church, was quarried from nearby Sprotborough and transported down the River Don. The tower remained until at least the 1500s and was once used as a prison. There were important military buildings to the south of here in the 1600s, and there was once a gatehouse on nearby Stonegate. In 1829, the tower had been demolished and only the foundations survived. The moors would have been valuable for hunting and fishing, with woodland providing fuel. Between 1626 and the English Civil War, Dutch engineer Cornelius Vermuyden, who lived in Queen Street in Thorne, drained the wetlands to make valuable farmland. Peat was dug by local people for fuel for fires, and peat cutting was done for horse and cattle litter in the 19th century, with modern peat cutting used for horticultural purposes. The canal was built in the 1790s, completed by 1797, and the Thorne Lock is the last lock on the Sheffield-Keadby Canal. Shipbuilding has been a huge part of Thorne's story for centuries. Richard Dunstan then built a shipyard at Thorne in 1858, began building wooden ships to go down the Humber. His grandson took control in 1910 and he focused on building iron and steamships. The Dunstan shipyard closed in 1985. Thorne Quay is now waterside. Thorne got its first market charter in 1658. The River Don trade increased, waterways and turnpikes were being developed into and out of the town, and in the 1800s, the railways came to Thorne. Windmills were also a large part of the economy and industry. Corn growing was an integral part of the agriculture and identity of this town, with Thorne having its own corn market until the 1860s. At this time it also had its own steam flour mill. Oats mill was built in 1815. In 1853 there were 6 mills in action in Thorne. Oats mill was sold off at auction in 1924. Talking of windmill, there's also the Windmill Pub, which was built by the 1850s, along with the Red Bear, the Canal Tavern and the White Hart, all built in the 18th century, with the White Hart Inn being built in 1737. There is also a cast iron memorial pump to the Crimean War in the marketplace, erected in 1856 at the Green, before being moved here in 1987, with a matching one erected in the Memorial Park. Near the Memorial Park is what used to be Thorne Hall, built in the mid-1700s, with 2-storey extensions to the pavilion wings added in the late 1800s. The Memorial Garden itself was once the pleasure grounds of the hall, formed in the mid-1800s. It was purchased from the Durham family for £700 in 1920 by Thorne Council, with the money being raised by public subscription, who also purchased the walled garden in 1953. It was modelled around the lake in the middle, which is believed to have been remnants of an ancient waterway, part of the long-gone many channels of the River Don. Near the lake is why the council bought this land and how the park got its name. The war memorial was unveiled by Harold Kenyon on Remembrance Sunday 1921. Harold's brother, Geoffrey, was a solicitor in Thorne and died on the Somme. This memorial is dedicated to the 113 men who died in the First World War, with the names of the 36 men who died in the Second added later. Nearby, there is a Methodist chapel. The first one, however, was opened in 1822 on King Street. The second, on South Parade near the Memorial Park, was opened in 1907, although there were reports of another Methodist chapel having its foundation stone laid by a procession in November 1857. This chapel was once frequented by a vocalist named Mrs. Ramsey, who died in 1938 after contracting pneumonia after attending the funeral of her brother in Birmingham. Talking of death, it's impossible to talk about Thorne without speaking about the dangerous and yet paramount part of its history, that is, Thorne Colliery. What is now South Yorkshire following its creation as a county in 1974 was abundant with collieries thanks to the Barnsley bed. The collieries then had communities constructed around them, with housing being built to accommodate incoming miners and their families. Thorne, like a lot of other places, was already a quite developed community before the colliery arrived. That is not to say, however, that Thorne Colliery did not play a part in developing Thorne further. Thorne Colliery also has quite an interesting story of its own as well. On the 12th of October 1909, ironmaking company Pease and Partners Limited began sinking at Moor Ends. Water delayed the sinking process until December, and the First World War stopped sinking altogether. Sinking restarted in 1919, and the shafts were completed in 1926. The High Hazel seam was reached in 1925 at a depth of 788 metres. While it was active, it was 3,000 foot deep, making it one of the 4 deepest coal mines in the entire country. And when production started, it was one of the most productive pits in all of the South Yorkshire coalfield. Coal was moved manually until the introduction of conveyors in 1933. There was a disaster on the 15th of March 1926 when an engine caused some scaffolding to sink, killing 6 men. These men were John Barley, Ernest Clark, John Hansbury, John Reed, Edmund Thorley and Charles Walton. In total, 13 people died at Thorne Colliery. Water became a huge problem for Thorne Colliery from 1936. In 1956, they had to close it temporarily in order to fix the sections that were damaged and letting in water. Temporarily, they said. As it was linked to Hatfield Colliery in 1958, they actually found that there were cracks in number 2 shaft, and that took until 1966 to repair. Then they found a bulge in number 1 shaft, which took until 1973 to fix. Ultimately, the colliery was abandoned in 1986 and the headgear was destroyed in 2004. Just because the industry left, however, doesn't mean the community spirit has. Thorne is a thriving community today, with a rich industrial past, but a bright future to look forward to. Of course, it's a place where people come and visit and stay and eat and go for a walk, but it's also a place that people call home.